In a world where dragons fall and monsters are wiped out in an instant, one man stands above them all: Yuji Sano. A magician so powerful, even the strongest beasts can't survive his spells. Yet just days before, he was nothing more than a sleep-deprived corporate slave, chained to a desk and buried in endless work. His fate changed the moment he clicked on a strange pop-up, transporting him into another world. What seemed like a curse became his greatest blessing, as even the weakest of slimes unlocked power that turned him into the most unstoppable force this world has ever seen. Yuji, with the help of his slimes, hunt down a monster. An adventurer who witnessed the event named Gale talks about witnessing a fire-breathing slime to his fellow adventurers at the Fast and Adventurers Guild. They don't believe him, and Yuji enters the guild with Sura on his shoulder and reports to Lily, the receptionist, that he completed the quest to find dryad flowers. Sura then spits out a ton of the flowers, shocking Lily, who reports this to the guild master Aegis. The man himself enters the scene and buys the lot from Yuji. At that moment, an adventurer by the name of Rezin enters the scene and reports smoke billowing from several parts of the forest, believing it to be a monster attack. Contacting his slimes stationed in the woods, Yuji learns that there is a large horde of monsters heading toward the area. Although Aegis suggests that the adventurers should evacuate with the citizens of the town, Yuji proposes that he uses a dragon bone in his possession to recreate a flame to decimate the incoming monsters. Despite being met with hesitance and skepticism from the adventurers, Gale recognizes the slime on Yuji's shoulder, vouches for him, and asks what they can do to help. Dusk settles in, and Lily, accompanied by Aegis, gives the adventurers their dryad potion. Rezin coordinates the adventurers outside the town gates, and Yuji, heading up a stairway, contacts Proud Wolf about the status on the front. Reaching his destination, Yuji watches as the adventurers handle the oncoming monsters and then feeds Sura the dragon horn while reporting to the slimes that they'll finish the battle within 15 minutes. Using his magic maker for analytical purposes, Yuji gets contacted by Dryad, who reports that she's spotted a suspicious person. Observing the person with the help of a magical visual screen, Yuji learns from Dryad the person placed a magical stone on the ground to summon the horde of monsters. Yuji then plans to erect a barrier around the stone and destroy it with a dispelling spell. Sending down 3 slimes, Yuji has them capture the person with a net, and then encases and destroys the stone. Left with no alternative, the person commits suicide, and Proud Wolf reports that he's reached the town. Under Yuji's command, he orders some of the slimes on Proud Wolf's back to assist Gale's team on the front, and they do so. Using his spell transfer skill, Yuji has the slimes kill the oncoming monsters and proves Gale's story from earlier that day as accurate. Yuji then concocts a plan to erect a barrier around the town that'll also be enchanted with the dragon fire. He then orders the eavesdropping Lily to have Aegis recall Gale and the other adventurers back into the town. Furthermore, he orders Dryad's team to retreat underground, and they do so with haste. Back in the town, Lily does what Yuji said, and all but Gale and Rezin stand and fight against a giant monster. Proud Wolf then attacks the monster's neck, takes it down, and leads Gale and Rezin inside the town. Wasting no time, Yuji erects the barrier and uses the Dragon Fire spell Hellfire Demise to eliminate nearly all of the monsters. Succumbing to MP Overdraw, Yuji still erects another barrier and casts Hellfire Demise again to eradicate the monsters and faints due to exhausting all of his energy. Afterward, Yuji awakens in a room somewhere with Lily and his slimes. Meanwhile, Aegis investigates the area where the now dead perpetrator set off the monster horde. Back to Yuji, he tries the soup that Lily served him and watches the townspeople celebrate their victory. Lily then asks him why he went through so much to save the town to which he has such little connection, but she retracts her question and leaves him. This makes Yuji recall his previous life, and without warning, he leaves the town without a trace, not wanting to cause a scene. The following day, Lily informs Aegis about Yuji's disappearance, and Lily spots a dirty lantern-like magic stone holder on Aegis' desk. Aegis notes that it belongs to the cult that has been talked about in the past. Unbeknownst to the two, a slime was eavesdropping on their conversation, and Surapaki reports that they're close to their destination, a new town. Yuji reaches his intended destination, Kilia, and he purchases meat for his tamed monsters from a butcher. As the monsters enjoy the meat, the sound of a bell resonates around the town. Yuji then learns from the butcher that the bell sounds originated from the church where a priest from the central city came from. Afterward, Yuji goes to the local adventurers guild to register there. Initially, the receptionist hesitates to allow Yuji to join the guild, but clears him to join after seeing he has an enemy tracking skill. Reviewing the jobs on the guild board, Yuji is approached by the adventurers Rhodys, Eris, and Lisa, who offers to join their party because of his tracking skills. Although Rhodys is reluctant to allow Yuji to join because he's a tamer, Tina and Lisa note his shaky past with other parties he was affiliated with. So, as a compromise, Tina and Lisa promise not to kick Rhodys out if he agrees to allow Yuji into their party, and he agrees. As the group head to their destination, a flashback shows the group accessing their job of locating an Earth Dragon. Back in the present, Proud Wolf with several slimes on his back scout ahead and report a pack of 5 wolves. The group then heads forward, and Rhodys deals with the monster wolves. Although the slimes could have handled the monsters, Yuji wanted to gauge his companion's capabilities. That night they camp by a riverside, and Lisa and Tina try to pry Yuji about his enemy tracking skills. However, Rhodys cuts in, suggests they get some rest, and delegates the turns they'll be taking of who'll be watching and sleeping. A flashback shows Yuji awakening in the alternate world and learning from his stats that he's a tamer. He then finds a tamed slime by his side, leading him to a house where he finds a grimoire and learns several elemental spells from it. It's then that more slimes appear, and they all become tamed by him after they read the books around the house. Yuji's skill set increases exponentially. He then earns the title of Sage. Awakened by a report from his slimes riding on Proud Wolf's back, they inform him that Rhodys had abandoned his watch and was on the run to someplace. Some slimes by his side then inform him that Tina and Lisa have gone missing. It turns out that the two were tailing Rhodys, who were suspicious of him after he set up the watch schedule. Eventually, Rhodys meets someone who plans to sell the girls for slaves and figures that Yuji will somehow die. The man Rhodys met is in cahoots with a cult group called the Blue Moon of Salvation. Accidentally, Lisa and Tina set off the trap in the area while they try to escape, but Proud Wolf and the slimes set off another one and appear like a giant beast. Not wanting to take a chance against it, the leader suggests they fall back and head back into the hut they were staying in. Taking advantage of the situation, Yuji casts ranged frost medium on the hut and completely freezes it. Later, Sura coughs up the leader of the group, and Tina recognizes the person as Jelios, a famous bandit around those parts. Once that is settled, a new camping spot is found and set up by Yuji's slimes. As Tina and Lisa sleep, Yuji sits by the fireplace and recalls what Jelios said about the Blue Moon of Salvation and figures they were behind the attack on Fastin. However, he wonders what the calamity that Jelios mentioned was about. Reaching close to the Delight Canyon, a strong gust of wind hits the group, and Tina claims that rumors say it's from the Earth Dragon they're after, but she doesn't believe in it. As the group heads toward the canyon, Yuji recalls when he first joined the Adventurers Guild in Fastin, where his skills were gauged by Rizin. Not surprisingly, Yuji passes all of the tests with flying colors. Back in the present, Yuji imposes a magical limiter on himself and has his slimes eliminate the monsters within the surrounding area. Just then, the sky turns dark, and back in Kilia, the town priest Stale discusses with the town's guild master Rayard a tome containing a prophecy related to the Blue Moon of Salvation. Proud Wolf then reports a giant blue dragon in the vicinity, and Yuji's group retreats into the canyon, trying to stay away from the dragon. Yuji then orders his tamed monsters to deal with the monsters surrounding the area that is ahead of his group. They do and reach outside the canyon. However, Yuji's group is ambushed by the Earth Dragon. Lisa and Tina flee, but Yuji stands his ground and uses weak spells against the Earth Dragon that do not affect it. Not wanting to cause a scene in front of the girls, Yuji uses the canyon's wind gusts to cover up the Earth Dragon with dust, allowing Yuji to eliminate it without causing a scene. Tina and Lisa believe that Yuji ignited the ore found underneath the ground to defeat the Earth Dragon. Afterward, at the Adventurers Guild, Yuji's group reports the defeat of the Earth Dragon and Rhodys' involvement with the infamous bandit Jelios. For their trouble, the group receives 14,070,000 gold, and Reynard takes Yuji to participate in a meeting led by him concerning the blue dragon that appeared in the canyon. Using his thoughtography, Yuji has Sura print a picture with the detailed picture of the blue dragon that he saw. Father Stale then reveals the legend behind the dragon, and that it'll destroy the land within 3 days. When Reynard asks Stale how the blue dragon was defeated in legends past, Stale claims that a divine emissary whose powers rival the gods would best it. However, any further information is lost because the tome that carried the information was ripped. Reynard speculates that 30 years ago, the church conducted a ritual as a lunar eclipse occurred, and the effects of the ritual would begin 30 years after the fact. It just so happens that 30 years passed a week ago, and the name of the ritual was called the Spirit Summoning Ceremony. Furthermore, the divine emissary has yet to appear, leaving them hopeless. The sky then briefly darkens again, and the slimes report that the blue dragon has grown in size again, and Yuji relays this to everyone in the meeting. Reynard then declares that the blue dragon would be subjugated at first light. Later, in the dining hall, Yuji and his slimes eat and are approached by Tina and Lisa, who inform him that they've joined the blue dragon subjugation squad. When they leave, Stale approaches Yuji and, in the cathedral, bestows upon Yuji a dagger relic that he brought from the capital. Yuji appraises the dagger as the Knife of Kethais, and later in his room, Yuji recalls what Rizin told him about his magic and thinks about trying something out. Facing off against the blue dragon, Yuji, with his tamed monster's help, manages to heavily damage the blue dragon with the combination of his Knife of Kethais and the Hellfire of Demise spell. Still, it's not enough to destroy it as it only takes out the blue dragon's left eye. With his mana deep in the red, Yuji waits until he's able to cast the Divine Strike spell, and it's powerful enough to fell the dragon, and again, with his Knife of Kethais in conjunction with the Hellfire of Demise spell, Yuji slices off the dragon's neck and killing it. The following day, Yuji answers the knocking on the door to his room, and it's Reynard who informs Yuji that Father Stale has left the town. Furthermore, Stale received a divine message that the blue dragon was defeated. Before leaving, Reynard calmly suggests that if Yuji wants help from the guild, like slaying a dragon, he can count on them to help. Later, Tina and Lily treat Yuji to some food and apologize for their party's sudden dissolution. When they ask what Yuji's future plans are, he discloses to head to another town, and they suggest Ricardo. Learning about its background, Yuji decides to go there next. As the two ladies see him off, he leaves a couple of slimes behind as a precaution. But as he's heading through a forest, Yuji is contacted by Dryad, who tells him that there's an emergency. It turns out that the emergency were newly ground red and blue mushrooms that Dryad could respectively create sage and mana restoration potions. Yuji then has his slimes collect the mushrooms, and Dryad tries to create a mana restoration potion, but it turns out wrong. Dryad notes that the water isn't pure enough, so Yuji creates a magical barrier shaped like a distiller with the help of a few slimes distills the water. Elated that Yuji was doing this, Dryad recalls when Yuji and her first met. A flashback shows Yuji destroying a magical stone that drained Dryad's forest of its energy. And as thanks, Dryad gave him some of her flowers as a token of her gratitude. In the present, the slimes alert the two that the water has been distilled. Hence, Dryad managed to create 5 sage potions and 2 mana restoration potions. Afterward, Yuji and his tamed monsters head to Ricardo while navigating through a thick fog. They soon get sidetracked by Proud Wolf picking up a human scent that leads them to a strange settlement where the people all smile at the group. The leader of the place welcomes the group and offers them a place to stay as the fog settles. However, Yuji declines, citing he'll make his way there soon enough. Although sad, the leader offers him a meal, and it's but a small half loaf of bread. Noting that he's not hungry, the leader then asks why he's there. Yuji then answers that the fog led him astray from his destination, and the leader takes it for what it's worth. Before leaving, Yuji asks what the place's name is, and the leader answers, Meshes. Outside of the village, Yuji ponders about the strange place they visited. In a hidden room in the village, the leader conveys via an orb about Yuji that the dragon's grace will be harvested from the canyon, all in the name of the blue moon of salvation. Meanwhile, Yuji's group finally sees Ricardo on the horizon, only to see that the place and the surrounding area are covered in snow. On their way to Ricardo, Yuji casts insulation barrier on himself due to the chilly weather. Reaching the town, Yuji learns from one of the gatekeepers that a winter storm struck the area 10 days ago. When asked why he was there, Yuji answers it was for the food, and the other gatekeeper suggests that he visit the Tiger's Flame Pavilion. Following this advice, Yuji finds the place, and the waitress there apologizes and informs him that until further notice, the establishment will be closed. The restaurant's closure is due to the lack of appropriate firewood to cook the food. Adamant to try the place's food, Yuji volunteers to get some dried firewood that'll work best for cooking. In the outskirts of the town, Yuji cuts down some trees. He then has the slimes use their moisture absorption skill to dry out the freshly cut wood. Later, Yuji delivers the wood to the Tiger's Flame Pavilion, and the waitress has the chef appraise it. At first, the chef rejects it as too dry, so Yuji has Sura moisturize it a bit. After the chef's reevaluation of the wood, and Yuji gives the rest of the firewood to his possession, and the chef cooks Yuji a grilled Angus cattle with Rishia herbs plate. Yuji enjoys the meal and promises to come the next day for the stew that's also served there. The waitress then mentions a firewood shortage in the town. Thus, Yuji volunteers again to fetch more. Reaching the Adventurers Guild, Yuji takes a firewood cultivation quest, and the receptionist explains the requisites behind it. Furthermore, she suggests that Yuji meet with Wadka, the firewood collection expert, for more information. Meeting with Wadka outside of the town, Yuji meets with Wadka and learns of the desperate situation concerning the firewood demand. Hearing that some nearby villages have offered to help Ricardo. However, it hasn't been enough. Yuji asks Wadka if Meshes has helped them, but learns that place has long since been abandoned. From there, Yuji cuts up the trees in the area and prepares them into firewood. Later, Wadka and Yuji turn in the firewood to the Adventurers Guild. The receptionist recounts a story from the church about Tamer, who used slimes for magnificent feats in the past. Yuji then offloads 3 days' worth of firewood for the town outside of the guild and, throughout the rest, prepares more for the town. The following day, Yuji enjoys Angus cattle with Rishia herbs stew at the Tiger's Flame Pavilion. Upon hearing what he enjoyed wasn't the chef's best meal, and from the waitress, the place where the Rishia herbs grow has been plagued with monsters. Hence, Yuji heads to the location and has his slimes do some reconnaissance around the area to search for the monster culprit, a greedy boar. Eventually, Surahapa, Hydesura, Pekasura, and Proud Wolf find a greedy boar, and Yuji takes it out with a fireball. 50 more are taken out, and the slimes soon find a mysterious orb. Afterward, Yuji has Dryad inspect the orb, but she doesn't know what it is and notes faint traces of magic emanating from the orb. After touching the orb, Yuji deduces that it's another dragon's grace and is absorbing the magic from the surrounding area. Learning that the orb was man-made, Yuji uses his magic to dispel it and has the slimes scour the area for more. Once Yuji finds out that 108 stones were placed around the area in a circular pattern and how conspicuous the forest's center was. Yuji has Dryad and his tamed monster evacuate the area as he destroys the forest center with Hellfire of Demise. After the smoke clears from the center, a secret entrance is found, and Yuji proceeds to investigate what lies beyond it. Yuji explores the underground area with his slimes while leaving behind Proud Wolf and Dryad. His slimes soon find rows of machine canisters and 5 smaller canisters with magical stones attached to the top of them in another room. 2 men then enter the room, assumingly affiliated with the Blue Moon of Salvation cultists. They check the machines with the stones on them, and one claims that they should report to Javier about a broken one. Once the cultists were out of the scene, Yuji allowed his slimes to tail the men and casts monster stealth on them. Outside with Proud Wolf, Yuji's sense share with his slimes reveal many diverging paths inside of the underground area they were in. Soon Hydesura and Mayusura locate the 2 cultist men going through a door, and the slimes follow them. Eventually, the slimes reach an iron door with a 2-lever lock, so Yuji has them open the door by simultaneously pulling the levers. They do this and continue forward until reaching a ladder, which Yuji has them climb. Yuji and Proud Wolf then reach Meshes, the village they visited before, while the slimes finally reach the surface. The slimes then find the 2 cultists they followed, reporting to Javier, and Yuji recognizes their capes as the same ones worn by the Blue Moon of Salvation. He also recognizes Javier as the town head he encountered, and that the big machine he saw within the underground area was called a curse well. In light of this, Javier orders his men to have all available people scour for more magical stones. Later, Javier would report the incident to the other cultist members, blamed it on a meteor strike or something similar, and had them retrieve the 108 stones in the area. Learning that the orbs Yuji collected, he then hears Javier order his men to kill any witnesses because the curse well is broken as the village is no longer of use. Therefore, Yuji has his slimes outside the village encircle the village within 1 kilometer and has the ones within it scout out anyone unaffiliated with the Blue Moon cultists. However, their search proves that only the cultists are in the village, but they do find a good-sized library, and Yuji has them take everything in there. Sura then finds 2 cultists in its sight, and Yuji casts magical net on them. Immediately, the 2 cultists commit suicide, and his 5 slimes in the library report they found another door, but without a way to open it. His slimes then report that bright lamps are linked to the door. Yuji uses his slimes to snuff out the lights to them with wind slicers. The door began to open, and behind it was a treasure trove of gold, trinkets, etc. Soon, a cultist learned that all of the texts and treasures were gone. It's later reported to Javier and their inability to make contact with the scouting team. Believing that the recent string of events is connected, it's speculated that the perpetrator is privy to the cleansing flame. The remaining cultists then commit suicide to activate said flame, and Yuji has his slimes make an emergency retreat. Once his slimes are out of the village, Yuji casts a triple-layer barrier to contain the cleansing flame. He then casts Total Isolation Array on the flames, which exhausts more than his fair share of MP. Yuji manages to snuff out the flames. Afterward, Yuji returns to the town, where a large crowd gathered by the entrance and informed him about the 2 large explosions thought to be meteor strikes. Wadka then mentions that because of the meteors, the frost in the town is finally starting to thaw. The following day, all of the frosts in the town melted, and a celebration was held in the Tiger's Flame Pavilion in Yuji's honor. Also, Yuji finally gets to try the town's special, Angus cattle and Rishia herb stew that made him cry himself unconscious. That evening, Yuji awakens in his room and decides to read the scrolls his slimes found in the Mesh's library. However, nearly all the text of the scrolls he tried to read disappeared, and the one that didn't was a hit list for the Blue Moon of Salvation. As it turns out, Yuji's name was also on the list. Elsewhere, 2 assassins kill off a bunch of people within a small fortress. 2 assassins stand close to a cliff and scour the forest below in search of Yuji and his companions. Down in the forest, Yuji thinks about how he had to leave Ricardo after finding his name on a hit list made by the Blue Moon of Salvation. A flashback shows Yuji back in Ricardo, informing the Adventurers Guild's receptionist about his departure and asking her for another town to visit. The receptionist suggests Virginia, a place famous for its monster armor, and recommends he see an armorer known as Jagel. Back in the present, Yuji and his companions continue forth, and one of Yuji's slimes informs him they're being watched, which Yuji was already aware of. Eventually, the 2 assassins catch up to Yuji, although the male assassin wants to kill Yuji. However, the female one threatens to kill him if he does, noting their mission is only to observe him. Unbeknownst to the 2, an incognito slime was in their presence, and Yuji was aware of them and had their stats up. Reaching Virginia, Yuji heads straight to Jagel's shop while the assassins continue to watch him. Yuji is shooed off from the place for not having enough money to purchase anything there. The assassin's observation continues as they watch Yuji encounter misfortune after misfortune in the town, and then watch as he has Proud Wolf face off against a Rush Bull as part of a quest in the Adventurers Guild. Initially, Proud Wolf was afraid to face off against the Rush Bull, but he surprises himself by defeating it with 1 blow, making him remember his strength. A flashback of Yuji and his slime's first encounter with Proud Wolf is shown. Yuji captures Proud Wolf in a magical net, and when he tries to speak, Yuji casts monster telepathy on it. Proud Wolf then tearfully apologizes to Yuji and agrees to become his tamed monster. In the present, Proud Wolf takes care of the remaining Rush Bulls, making the assassins weary of Yuji again. Hence, Yuji casts Heal on the Rush Bulls a few times to make it seem like Proud Wolf is incapable of finishing them off. But Proud Wolf's pride won't back down. So, Yuji casts a physical and magical buff on the Rush Bulls, which makes them seem too strong for Proud Wolf to handle. but he refuses to back down and get any help from Yuji's magic. Proud Wolf then single-handedly defeats the Rush Bulls all by himself, but one still manages to get back up and attack Yuji, who uses his magic to summon a sword and defeat the monster. Although Yuji was anxious that his cover was blown, the two assassins decided that Yuji was nothing more than a regular tamer and left. Before Yuji calls back the slime that spied on them, he overhears the assassins talking about targeting a priest next. That night, the assassins reported their findings concerning Yuji to their benefactor. They then learn from their benefactor that Meshes was taken out and that the perpetrator is believed to be the priest. After the assassins cut off communications with their benefactor, the female one confirms that the priest they were talking about was Stale. To avoid Stale being assassinated by the two, Yuji casts an ice spell on them that instantly freezes them to death. Once the deed was done, Yuji ponders why members of the Blue Moon of Salvation would target Stale. The following day, Yuji revisited Jagel's shop and was nearly shooed away again by the apprentice worker, after he requested armor for his slimes. Jagel then intervenes and agrees to make some armor for his slimes, but cannot due to unknown circumstances. Jagel informs Yuji that he can't create any armor for him with the materials that he currently has. The problem was primarily due to his slimes being stronger than what he could adequately provide them. Jagel's assistant doesn't believe Yuji's tamed monsters are nothing special. However, Jagel corrects him that paired with Yuji, they're a force to be reckoned with. Believing that creating armor for his monsters is out of the question, Jagel corrects him claiming they need some strong material for them. Showing a lesser fire dragon orb, Jagel shows it to Yuji and explains how material factors create armor. Yuji figures that great material can produce great armor, and Jagel confirms it while suggesting that Yuji hunt for some blue lesser fire dragon orbs. They are dragons that inhabit the mountain close to the town, but are notably rare and challenging to defeat. In return for a blue lesser fire dragon orb, Jagel promises to craft something for him. Before Yuji heads off, he asks if there are normal dragons there, which Jagel claims he's never heard of anyone slaying one in his entire life. Mindful of what Jagel said, Yuji heeds Jagel's advice, visits the Adventurers Guild, and takes on a whole stack of requests related to the mountain area. The receptionist informs Yuji that lesser fire dragons are immune to magic-based attacks because their embedded gems and their durable scales are resilient against physical attacks. Although water is a lesser fire dragon's weakness, water is scarce on the mountain, and water magic is too difficult for an ordinary person to use an adequate amount to defeat one of them. However, Yuji is confident in his water magic skills. The receptionist also warns Yuji that he'll have to cross a river to reach the mountain, and be careful of the piranha swimming in said river. Not at all afraid, Yuji requests that he take on the requests to take on the piranha as well. Afterward, Yuji and his tamed monsters stand in close view of a volcano, and there, Yuji tames some red slime and, from one of them, learns that it's safe to go past the volcano. Upon reaching the river where the piranhas were located, Yuji casts a new spell called Slime Net to allow the slimes to scour the river for the piranhas. Eventually, a fire slime finds a hole, and when it doesn't return after a while, Mayusura follows it. Moments later, the two slimes are chased by a piranha that gets entangled in the slime net. From there, Yuji pulls the piranha to the surface and freezes it after it breaks out of the net. However, the piranha breaks out from its frozen state, and then Yuji casts a fireball spell to defeat it. Moving forward, Yuji encounters the lesser fire dragons, and because his slimes are too afraid to attack them, Yuji casts water cannon on one of them and collects its orb. Inspired by Yuji's actions, the slimes attack the remaining lesser fire dragons with the help of Yuji's water cannon. Once that was done, a slime reports it found a blue lesser fire dragon and gets a visual of it. Coordinating with his slimes, Yuji has 10 slimes surround the blue lesser fire dragon and cast water cannon on it. Their attempt to defeat it fails, so Yuji casts an ice spell on it, but that too isn't enough to defeat it. Hence, he casts an ice spell times 10 to defeat the blue lesser fire dragon, and orders his slime to hunt the rest of the lesser fire dragons on the mountain and call it a day. Afterward, Yuji reports his successful subjugation of the lesser fire dragons and the piranha at the Adventurers Guild. The receptionist also filled out an emergency survey form about the piranha's abnormal activity. Later, Yuji visits Jaejel's shop to deliver 2 blue lesser fire dragon orbs and 202 lesser fire dragon orbs. Keeping his promise to Yuji, he creates gear for Proud Wolf and Sura with the blue lesser fire dragon orbs. When the 2 monsters try out their new armor, it makes them move at an incredible speed. Doing a durability test, Yuji casts multiple stat boosting spells on them. They both manage to survive unscathed. Finally, Yuji uses an ice spell that creates a giant iceberg in the area they were practicing in. Returning to Jaejel's shop, Jaejel warns that Yuji's offensive spells would break the gems used in the crafted armor, but a fire dragon would work. One lives in the volcano's center, but Jaejel warns not to mess with it. As Yuji contemplates how to proceed and recalls the receptionist filling out an emergency survey form, a slime reports that the lesser fire dragons are acting strange. Upon receiving a visual of the lesser fire dragons, Yuji recalls how the monsters in Fasten acted similarly. Recalling the voice from the orb associated with the blue moon of salvation, Yuji has Proud Wolf and a pack of slimes investigates the area for anyone there. They spot a couple of men, each carrying 2 barrels on their backs, and just then, the volcano erupts with the fire dragon emerging from its center. Witnessing the volcano erupt as the fire dragon emerged from it, Yuji contacted Proud Wolf's group and learned they were fine. He then orders them to be on alert and relay any changes to him. Contacting Surapaki, Yuji learns that the 2 men carrying barrels are heading toward where the fire dragon was located. An invisible Mayusura eavesdrops on the conversation of the 2 men targeting the fire dragon. One of the men notes that their plan is infallible due to the instructions given to them by the guys in Ordarian. Hoping to learn what the men were carrying in the barrels, Yuji casts magical net in hopes of capturing them, but they deftly dodge the spell. Figuring it was just a trap, the 2 continue forward, and again Yuji has Mayusura cast magical net, only for him to get pierced by a sword thrown at him by one of the men. Despite Mayusura's cover being blown, Yuji manages to have Surapaki catch the men in a magical net. Unable to move and surrounded by the slimes, the men commit suicide to avoid interrogation. Deducing that the men were part of the Blue Moon of Salvation, Yuji has the slimes investigate the barrels. With the presence of magical stones in the area, Yuji summons Dryad to seek her opinion on the situation. Dryad then details that the water carried in the barrels was contaminated by the malignance of the magical stones and Yuji suspects they'd be used against the fire dragon. Hence, Yuji casts Dispel Extreme through Hydesura on the water barrels, purifying them. With her job complete, Dryad returns to the forest as the slimes notice the lesser fire dragons start to act up. The innkeeper then knocks at Yuji's door and warns him that the rain will pour down soon. Outside, the people of the village begin to evacuate as thunder rumbles in the sky, and it starts to rain. As Yuji stands outside the village with the volcano in sight, he recalls the warning the innkeeper gave him about how the fire dragon never awakens during a rainy time like then. Proud Wolf's group then warns Yuji that the dragon is heading in his direction, and that the rain is hurting the lesser fire dragons. Commentary of the innkeeper reveals that 50 years ago, during the last rainstorm, the fire dragon bathed all of Virginia in flames. As the village residents continue to evacuate, Yuji has Proud Wolf's group head to the first river that blocks the dragon's path to the village, and has Proud Wolf observe the fire dragon see if he'll cross it. Proud Wolf's group does, and they note the hot climate change in the area and witness the dragon pass through, causing the piranha in it to die and the river to evaporate. As the fire dragon heads to the second river, Yuji states they're going to fight it, and has Proud Wolf confront it by the second river. He then tries to freeze it a few times, but all attempts fail. When the fire dragon reaches the second river, Yuji dispels the barrier he used to dam a stream of water that drowns the fire dragon. However, it's still not enough to stop the fire dragon, and as it tries to launch a giant fireball at the village, Yuji Proxy casts Permafrost Curse through Surapaki and freezes it. Once frozen, the fire dragon shatters and leaves behind its jewel. A strange device is also found at the site. Afterward, Yuji visits Jaejel's shop and asks him to craft something with the fire dragon's jewel that he has. Later at the Adventurers Guild, Yuji asks the receptionist for information on Ordarian. The receptionist claims that Ordarian isn't a popular place due to its value of privacy and doesn't like interference from outside towns or villages. Yuji then shows the receptionist the device he found at the volcano, who informs him that it's an artificial rainmaker that nearly every guild has to combat droughts. The receptionist also notes that the name of where the rainmaker came from was etched out. Recalling what the two men he tailed earlier said about Ordarian, Yuji suspects that the rainmaker came from there. The following day, Yuji visits Jagel's shop and receives his new armor from Jagel. Before leaving to try it out, Jagel asks for Yuji's name, but he responds that he hopes to stay anonymous. Elsewhere, a member of the Blue Moon of Salvation casts a spell on himself, and in a town somewhere else, a hooded young man accompanies Stale. When Yuji and his group arrive at Ordarian and immediately head to the Adventurers Guild there. Noticing that the people there attentively watch his every move, Yuji decides to leave, but leaves Sura behind to eavesdrop on a couple of men who discuss his presence in the town. To no surprise, they were a part of the Blue Moon of Salvation and decided to seek advice from Master Walter on how to approach the situation involving Yuji any further. As Yuji eavesdrops on this conversation, he's approached by Stale and his associate. Afterward, Yuji, Stale, and his associate reserve the town's church, and Stale reveals that a revelation brought him to that place to meet with Yuji. In turn, Yuji conveys that the Blue Moon of Salvation has the town's guild under their control, and they're also cautious of Stale. Stale then reveals his past with a man known as Walter and the history of the Blue Moon Church. It started as a way to honor fallen comrades, which gradually grew into a large organization where Walter joined and became Stale's right-hand man. However, unbeknownst to Stale, Walter had nefarious ambitions, and through a divine revelation, Stale was commanded to dismantle his organization. Not wanting to betray his comrades, Stale refused to follow the command, and days later, his church was attacked, and his companions allowed him to escape at the cost of their lives. The divine message was a warning to Stale about the attack as an attempt of Walter to usurp control of the Blue Moon Church, transforming it into the Blue Moon of Salvation. Remorseful of his past miscreations, Stale traveled to Ordarian to warn and advise Yuji to stand against Walter as the divine emissary to prevent him from hatching his nefarious plot to purify the world. Although Yuji denies being the divine emissary, Stale points out that he who wields the dagger of Kethais is the divine emissary. With that, Stale wishes him the best of luck. Watching Yuji walk away from the church from his room, Stale's associate Johan asks Stale why he didn't reveal the entire revelation to him. The reason why Stale did this was to protect Yuji, as he believed he'd turn his back on the task if he knew the whole truth. Elsewhere, Walter receives a report about Yuji's meeting with Stale. After hearing it, Walter heads into a room where he prays to a machine containing fluids that would launch his plan into fruition. In his room, Yuji contemplates Stale and Walter's relationship and how he's the divine emissary. Yuji then recalls the receptionist from Ricardo informing him about a slime tamer who had a similar ability in the past that she heard about from the church. The following day, Yuji tries to ask Stale about it, but he finds out that Stale and Johan had to leave the town due to pressing matters. Heading outside, Yuji asks his slimes if they saw anyone leave resembling Stale and Johan, and both Mayusura and Pekasura report that they did. Yuji then orders the two to find and follow them. Meanwhile, Stale and Johan locate a tainted barrier, and Stale purifies it, allowing the two passage through it. They then locate a dilapidated building where the Blue Moon of Salvation made their home base. Learning of the location of Stale and Johan from his slimes, Yuji has them guide him to their location as the two in question continue forward and encounter a group of Blue Moon members. Stale casts a couple of defensive spells on himself and Johan. Then, he prepares to face off against their opponents. Soon Yuji arrives in the area, dispels the barrier, and heads inside it as Stale and Johan reach the building. Inside the main hallway of the building, they're confronted by Walter and his cohorts, and Stale vows to redeem himself by stopping Walter. Amused by Stale's conviction, Walter signals his cohorts to ready themselves to attack Stale and Johan, just as Yuji and his monsters arrive in the area. As they try and walk past the unconscious bodies of the Blue Moon cultists, one grabs hold of Sarpaki. Back to Stale's side, he defends himself against the Blue Moon cultists, and after he does, Johan betrays him by constricting him in a magical rope and shocks him unconscious. Awakening from his unconscious state, Stale deduces that Walter had him lead Yuji to that location. Walter then discloses a couple of feats Yuji committed that foiled his cult's plot to purify the world, and Johann finishes the rest. Despite their past failures, Walter is confident they'll succeed and will ultimately achieve the world they strive for. On the other hand, Stale doesn't fear his impending death and warns that the divine emissary will come and stop him once he's dead. Amused by Stale's resolve, Walter reanimates his cultists' followers with the tainted light magic he used on them. Before Walter has Johann finish Stale off, Yuji arrives at the scene, and although he wants to ask him a question, he realizes it wasn't an appropriate time. Upon arriving at the scene where Father Stale was at Walter's mercy was going to be killed by Johann, Yuji casts barrier to protect him from the fireball shot by Johann and dispels the magical binding cast on Stale, who then points out who Walter was to Yuji. Pleased that Stale had led Yuji to their location, Walter orders his awakened ones to rise again and dispose of Yuji and his comrades. As Yuji deals with the awakened ones, Walter, accompanied by Johann, leaves as Stale calls out to Walter. However, Walter leaves the room with Johann, seals it, and heads to a room where he sits on a throne-like chair and channels the dark magic powering the area into himself. Moments later, Yuji's group arrives at the scene and witnesses Walter's transformation. Yuji tries to disrupt it by firing a fireball at Walter, but it proves futile. The newly transformed Walter then attacks the group, and Proud Wolf protects Yuji and Stale from a devastating attack. Right as Yuji surmises that Walter imbued himself with Dragon's grace, Walter transforms into a more dragon-esque form. To protect Stale from an incoming attack, Yuji casts a duo set of anti-physical and magical barriers on him and counterattacks with a fireball, but it misses. Having Proud Wolf carrying a group of slimes on his back leap into the air, Yuji has the slimes cast multiple fireballs in different directions. Despite dodging those spells, Yuji continues the onslaught, casting more fireballs until finally, they manage to hit Walter. However, the fireballs don't even scratch him. Changing his tactics, Yuji has Sura and Proud Wolf equip the accessories that Jagel crafted for them and cast magical and physical enhancement spells on them. Proud Wolf and Sura then overwhelm and heavily injure Walter through their combined powers. Taking advantage of the awakened ones around the area, Walter absorbs the dragon's grace from one of them to heal himself. After taking another fireball hit from Yuji, Walter absorbs more power from the awakened ones to heal again and grow another pair of arms. Weary of the precautions Walter was now taking, Yuji bombards Walter with fireballs, but he continues to recover from the attacks. Realizing that the power imbued into Walter was a form of a curse, Yuji mounts onto Proud Wolf and, when he recovers after one of his attacks, casts the spell to petrify his feet. Furious by this outcome, Walter attacks Yuji's newly erected barrier until Yuji has his slimes and Proud Wolf wrap a magical net around Walter. Yuji then casts Hellfire of Demise on Walter, which fatally wounds him, but in his dying breath states that he hopes his revelation comes true. Stale conveys this to Yuji as the throne-like chair that Walter sat on to transform himself gathers all of the dragon's grace within the area and forms into a being calling himself the Sage. Stale then confesses to Yuji about omitting some information from the revelation he had and goes on to explain the Sage's history as the former emissary. Apparently, Walter planned to resurrect the Sage, who then casts Hellfire of Demise to decimate the surrounding area, but thankfully Yuji's groups were protected by barriers. Casting multiple enhancement spells on his monsters, Yuji has his monsters reach the Sage in the sky and cast Fireball on him, but it fails to connect, and he counterattacks with Hellfire of Demise. Hence, Yuji has his slimes surround the Sage and cast a barrage of fireballs which still do not affect him. Noticing the dropping of his MP, Yuji surmises that the Sage could have infinite MP. Using his slimes to ground the Sage, both he and Yuji cast Hellfire of Demise times 10 against each other. In the end, Yuji finally manages to get the upper hand on the Sage. Once the smoke settles, the Sage is seen to be unharmed, and using a different tactic. He activates several artificial rainmakers in the area filled with Dragon's Grace to make it rain. It causes the monsters within the periphery to go berserk. As the Rainmakers disperse the Dragon's Grace around the country, Gale and his companions defend Fasten from the entranced monsters. Yuji surmises that they did this to make the monsters in the country go berserk. The Sage then speaks to Yuji, detailing that in life, the Sage martyred himself to defeat the dragon. This act filled his soul with regret, and he lamented how even though sages exist to save the world from dragons, more powerful ones still appear. Hence, Sage planned to break the cycle by making the monsters go berserk. Hoping to give Yuji salvation, Sage casts Hellfire of Decimation on him, but Yuji protects himself with a multi-layered barrier. Yuji then gets counterattacks with his own Hellfire of Decimation, and the two get into a battle using the spell against each other. Stale, protected by a barrier, watches from not too far away, and the slimes then alert Yuji that the monsters are heading toward Kilya. So, Yuji defeats them by transferring fireball spells toward them, all while doing the same to the surrounding towns he once visited. With his MP deep in the red, Dryad informs Yuji that everyone in Faston is gathering in the town center. Apparently, everyone in fighting condition within the town was preparing to fight the oncoming monsters, and Yuji ordered one of his slimes to protect Gale. More reports from the slimes show that it's the same as their town station points. Relieved that the towns were more than willing to protect themselves from the monster onslaught, Yuji recalls how he was always a loner in his previous life. Filled with newfound determination, Yuji casts multiple enhancement spells and transfers them to everyone fighting against the monster outbreaks. Stale then notifies Yuji of a new divine message that a divine judgment will be delivered during an eclipse. However, the sky is covered by dark purple clouds, which makes it difficult to tell when that'll happen. So, Yuji uses an MP potion given to him by Dryad to recover most of his missing MP, which works wonders for him. Ordering Proud Wolf to take Stale away to a safe location, Yuji uses magical barriers to help him leap into the air and face off against Sage. Sage asks why Yuji decided to defend the world, to which Yuji answers he has no reason. In truth, however, Yuji recalls everyone he met to that point and believed that the world was best off as it was. Amused that they'll be fighting against each other for no reason, Sage casts multiple Hellfire of Decimation spells at Yuji, who counters with the same spell. Sage mocks Yuji, noting that it'll only be a matter of time before he'll be incinerated by his Hellfire of Decimation spell, and Yuji agrees. It's then that Yuji sees the Divine Strike move that he used against the Blue Dragon could be used in less than 45 seconds and believes that's what the judgment mentioned before was about. Once it's available, Yuji uses it against Sage, causing him to crash and fall to the ground below. Seeing that he can use it again in less than 30 seconds and uses it multiple times against Sage. Noting how a direct approach isn't working, Yuji pulls out the Dagger of Kethais and, with the assistance of his slimes, casts Divine Strike on the dagger. This clears up the sky, revealing the eclipse in progress. Now wielding the powered-up dagger, Yuji casts multiple spells on Sage and himself to encase them in an impenetrable barrier. He then uses the dagger against Sage, which defeats him. That afternoon, Stale prays at a church altar, recites a prophecy from his book, and hopes he might meet Yuji again one day. The man in question was walking through a forest with his monsters, who asked why didn't they stay in Ordarion. But Yuji mentioned that the Blue Moon of Salvation still ran the guild there. Hence, they'd draw suspicion if they stayed in the town. Yuji then receives reports from Dryad and the slimes from various towns that the people celebrate their respective victories against the monsters. Back in Ordarion, members of the Blue Moon of Salvation discuss the failure of Walter's endeavor and what actions are necessary to move forward. However, one of the members states that all is still fine as the purifier is nearly complete. The moment it's activated, it'll cleanse the continent, killing off all life in the land. Their main goal is to eliminate the Black Dragon of Ruin, and Yuji eavesdrops on the entire conversation while eating some meat by a campfire with his monsters. Just then, a pack of large cannibal tigers surrounds the camp. The following day, Yuji turns in the quest related to the monster, and the receptionist there believes that Yuji is the sole survivor against the monsters. However, the guild master Megia analyzes the cannibal tiger corpse and reveals that it was killed by a single person, mainly by fire. This escalates when Megia suspects Yuji of the famous tamer that can use magic, and the receptionist recounts the heroic deeds done by Yuji, drawing unwanted attention to him.